Xiaoshan, Yeguan, fake Taoist. Open half an acre of square field and surround it with a vegetable garden. Fishing, planting flowers, picking herbs, practicing martial arts. I can also study recipes when I have nothing to do. Accompanied by the clear breeze and bright moon, with peach, pear, pine, and cypress as friends. In short, this is the mundane daily life of a stranger. Keywords of the novel. Years of farming on the mountain without pop-ups, years of farming on the mountain. Download the complete TXT collection, and read the latest chapters of those years of farming on the mountain. Chapter 1. Yunhe Temple on Qingtai Mountain, 4 comments. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Yunhe Temple on Qingtai Mountain, 4 comments. In early spring in March, under the warm sun, the warm breeze melts away the last trace of coldness left by the cold winter. The mountains and fields are green, and the streams are babbling with water. On the mountainside, amidst the shade of trees, a half-acre soil field is exposed in front of us, overgrown with weeds and vines. A young man was dressed in cloth clothes, with his pants legs rolled up to his knees. The iron hoe in his hand kept falling and lifting, flipping the soil open, smashing it with the handle, and teasing it to the side. It can be seen that there are already many soil dragons piled up on the small field at this moment, of different sizes, which are dried yellow by the bright sun. Hee. Another hoe fell, and the young man paused, but a plump and tender earthworm was dug out of the ground. The sudden change in the environment made it somewhat panicked. Its slender body twisted, and the end with a white ring kept drilling on the mud, as if it wanted to bury itself back in the soil. Then he was choked, and the young man clasped his fingers together, disregarding his struggle and sending the other person into the bamboo tube hanging around his waist. Close the wooden lid, and through the specially left air hole in the middle, you can still vaguely see many similar species. The bait for tomorrow's wild fishing is here, and the young man has a smile on his face, with a hint of anticipation in his eyes. There are several secluded springs and streams on this mountain, and there are too many places to fish. Last time he entered the forest, he discovered a new fishing spot and felt like there were big objects inside. Just a while ago, I had to be busy organizing classics and repairing Taoist temples, so I couldn't spare any time and have been moving until now. It's a pity. Looking up at the sky, young people recall the long schedule in their minds and realize that they will have a lot of free time recently. After thinking about it, he continued to wield his iron hoe, preparing to sort out this once almost abandoned field this morning. At least he had to clean up the weeds that were growing everywhere first. It is now March, and according to memory, it will soon be the season of Pinyu. The rain will fall one after another, and the timing of cloudy and sunny days will be unpredictable. However, it happened to be the time for sowing. If we drag on until then, it will be too late to take care of the fields. We will have to go to the foot of the mountain every 10 days, as in previous years. It will consume a lot of time and money, and the journey will be even more dangerous. The Qingtai mountain under his feet is not high, but the mountain road is particularly slippery and bumpy, winding. Occasionally, insects and snakes appear. In previous years, a virtuous person who went up the mountain to offer incense was killed by the triangle leaf occupying the mountain path. So it is undoubtedly necessary to cultivate this area of land before Pinyu. The sun gradually rises, and sometimes a gentle breeze blows. The trees tremble and the branches and leaves touch each other, and the rustling sound echoes through the mountains and fields. On the field, the youth kept waving non-stop. When people focus on one thing, time always passes quickly. Until the last corner was cleared and all the weeds were pulled out, the young man, covered in sweat, stopped his hand movements and wiped his forehead. Licking his lips, he glanced at the sky. It's not yet noon, and looking at the tidy land in front of me, I feel a sense of accomplishment. Put down the hoe and stand heavily on the ground. The weeds have been cleared and the rough soil turning has been basically completed. Next, we need to dig ditches and channels, the young man thought. But this matter is not urgent, there is still some time, and he thinks it's not too late to talk about it in the afternoon. As for now, it's natural to go clean up and then prepare lunch. I didn't feel it before, but when I stopped, I suddenly realized that my stomach couldn't bear it anymore, and all my organs seemed to be rebelling. The rumbling sound in the abdomen kept going, and the feeling of hunger was like flipping over a bottle of juice, overflowing uncontrollably at the tip of the heart. So I packed my things and walked away quickly. Not long after turning around, a few flying eaves resembling clouds and mist emerged from the shade and fell into the eyes. A few more steps inside, a peaceful and tranquil view of a bay located on the mountainside is presented. Not to mention the carved buildings and painted buildings, let alone the rows and rows. 4 or 5 small flat tiled houses were scattered together without any aesthetic sense, and thus became this Taoist temple. As the head was upright, 3 large characters were written on the plaque. Yunhe Temple. Avoiding the 2 rows of peach trees in front of him, shaking off the mud and dust on his body, the young man stepped into the temple. No one greeted, no one entered or exited. He is already the only one here, the 5th-generation leader and only disciple of Yunhe Temple, and the contemporary Yunhe son. Chen Yu. Of course, as he was well aware of his weight, he did not pay too much attention to this observer identity, nor did he consider doing anything based on it. A grass-headed Taoist temple combined with a wild chicken Taoist, where does he have the confidence to go all out? Chen Yu doesn't have that mindset. In his opinion, it would be better for an infant to stay on the mountain, plant crops, fish, practice martial arts, and occasionally read the so-called Taoist scriptures that were about to be turned over. Days are leisurely, isn't it joyful? The Taoist temple is not big enough to distinguish between the inside and outside, but if you insist, except for the 2 bedrooms closest to the inside and the main hall dedicated to it, the other few can be called outer courtyards. And at the outermost point is the one in front of us. A few years ago and even earlier, this place was often used to receive pilgrims and kind-hearted scholars. Even when the old Taoist was still alive, he would practice his skills and teach the Taoist scriptures here. It's just that things are different from people, and it's already quite deserted. Step into the hospital. A large, 3, and 4 water tanks were arranged by the wall. A few days ago, there was a cold rain, and the larger one was filled with half of it, while the 3 smaller ones were filled with a full load. I can vaguely see the floating green duckweed in the water tank. On the other side, there are lush green pines and a big-headed pear, but it looks much lower than the former. The 2 trees are separated on the left and right, slightly staggered, each circling around a grassy area, leaving a small path paved with crushed stones in the middle. Although the yard is not large, the objects in front of me are arranged exquisitely, giving it a sense of spaciousness at first glance. Chen Yu untied the bamboo tube containing earthworms and leaned it against the foot of the pillar. Arriving at the small water tank, he simply rinsed his hands and casually wiped his face with a handful. The cold and cool touch penetrated his face, washing away sweat and sludge, while also exhausting his fatigue. He lifted his head and casually wiped it before entering the deeper part. The worship hall is located in the center. The huge Taoist characters were pasted at the head of the room, and when I stepped over, I saw a row of small stone clusters neatly arranged under the incense table. However, in front of the hall was a tall porcelain statue of an old man with long beard and eyebrows, holding an ancient mirror in his arms. Looking at the appearance alone, it exudes a sense of solemnity while maintaining harmony and kindness. On both sides below, there are many true rulers of different sizes and shapes seated. It is also made of ceramics, but its level of delicacy cannot match that of the leader. Roughly speaking, it's probably not under 20. These are the various true gods worshipped in Yunhe Temple. Titles vary in size, and there are also various options available. Some of their origins are purely fabricated, while many are inspired by the heroic deeds of ancient times. The time and background stories vary. Or it could be adding fuel and vinegar to the good deeds of the people, or it could be that one day they were granted an imperial edict, and then they became the true ruler of the Tao, enjoying the incense and offering blessings while also protecting one side. For example, Mu Yuan, who inherited his original memory, knew that the image of the angry Taoist wearing a long robe and holding two swords in the inner position of the second row on the lower left came from a widely circulated folk legend in Shizhou. As for the prototype, it is probably a general who fought a bloody battle on the battlefield during the Qian weekend year, about 300 years ago. It is estimated that this ancient man could not have imagined that in 300 years, he had leapt to become one of the several true Taoist figures in the southwest region. Even many disciples from other branches walked around the world under their name, fishing for incense. However, there are exceptions, such as the top leader. Qingji Yuqiong Baoling Shihua Yuan Tian Zun, one of the ancestors of Taoism in this area, with a great reputation. Whether in the south or north, there are countless disciples and grandchildren of Taoism who worship him. At the same time, few people dare to use this name to deceive and deceive. After all, it is necessary for all the self-proclaimed orthodox Taoists to poke their spines and spit. I really want to meet someone as hot-tempered as the Qianyang Dao Mai, and I can't help but suffer 2 more blows. The fake Taoist Chen Yu, who had taken on the position of the abbot, naturally wouldn't do such a shameless thing. Although he was originally considered an atheist, since he had come to this world and upheld the idea that he would not be at a disadvantage and at least insert a fragrance, he still treated these immortals and true rulers with courtesy. At this moment, he came to the table, skillfully lit the incense candle, shook 4 pieces of blue wax, and inserted them into the central copper seat. 4 square, with 1 root planted in each corner. 1 place, 1 land, and 1 place, 1 rule. Nowadays, people in this temporal and spatial context have some differences in the rules and regulations of worship compared to their memories. 3 fragrant sandalwood trees discuss the golden roof, and 1 green and 4 waxes show respect. Yunhe Temple is financially constrained and cannot discuss the golden summit like major schools such as Xingyang and Lingyi. Fortunately, incense candles are cheap and enough to manage. It can also be considered a way to express one's feelings. In no time, the curly smoke with the fragrance of wood and grass swirled and climbed, landing several feet above the desk, and then drifting away in an instant. Chen Yu made a decent appearance and then clapped his hands before turning around and entering the kitchen. This book is purely a newcomer's work, so there are significant shortcomings in the rhythm, description, plot, etc. If the process really does not suit the taste of the audience, we apologize for wasting your time. At the same time, please leave a suggestion before leaving. Also, do not physically attack, as the author's heart is fragile and cannot withstand it. Thank you very much. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. A bowl of jade insect clothes, 4 comments. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. A bowl of jade insect clothes, 4 comments. Eating is never an easy task. People's obsession with food is also profound enough. Those who fly in the sky, those who run on the ground, and those who swim in the water, whether they can move or live, as long as they can bite and fill their stomachs, there will always be people who will have the courage to bite. As for whether it is poisonous or not, it all depends on the heavens. Chen Yu's obsession with food is far from that level, but he still likes food. If he could eat better, he wouldn't refuse with affectation. During the initial period of coming here, it was through eating this very ordinary thing that the strong unease in my heart when I first arrived was calmed down. In the kitchen, I washed a handful of fresh and tender green vegetable leaves and skillfully cut them into threads against the back of the knife. Turn on the stove, start a fire, and then scoop out 2 ladles of clean water from the water tank. Different from the 1 big, 3 small, and 4 water tanks outside, the one in front of me is not only bigger, but also the water inside is all drawn from the stone well, clear and warm. Holding a slender wooden brush tied together in bundles, he washed the pitch-black iron pot clean, and then picked up 2 pieces of firewood to make the fire in the stove even more lively. The tongue of fire protruded from the stove and licked the edge of the pot. Add water and boil. Quickly passing the shredded vegetables through the pot, I quickly turned around and scooped up a black and unadorned object from the dustpan on the nearby wooden frame. Sinking in boiling water, there was a gurgling sound. With a clang, the wooden lid of the pot was tightly covered. He held a bowl of shredded vegetables and placed it in a wooden basin, wrapped in cool well water, waiting for it to slowly cool down. The dish I'm going to cook this afternoon is not considered a famous dish, but it also has a certain name. It's called mock bygone. In my memory, I once heard the old abbot mention that this thing has an elegant name, called blue sky moyu. The words that the farmer in the mountains has never heard a few times combined, but they are ordinary dishes that the vast majority of people at the foot of the mountain have eaten. Due to its sweet taste and refreshing taste, this dish is loved by many people, especially in the early spring when everything is reviving. Most families will prepare 1 or 2 dishes. Taking advantage of his leisure time, Qingyu planted some plants in the backyard. This is a vegetable that looks like seedlings, with tender green roots and narrow leaves. Extremely long-lasting and easy to cook. Just bury it underground and you can pick it in about a month. He just prefers the snow-white bud tips exposed after the leaves fall off at maturity to the slightly crispy and dry stem. White, tender, and moist, like insects, resembling jade. The taste is sweet and refreshing. Whether it's served raw with some oil and salt, or steamed in water after being sun-dried and marinated, they are all rare delicacies in the mountains. After some hustle and bustle, Qingyu finally sat down at the table with a bowl of green and black mixed cold dishes. It is said to be dry, but in reality, it does not appear white. On the contrary, it turns a bit black after being dried. Fortunately, after being boiled in water, it has a somewhat ink-like purity. At this moment, the small dish in front of me is in line with the saying of the blue sky and ink jade. Without waiting much, Qingyu served the rice, then made a bowl of thick rice soup and put it aside. He picked up a piece and handed it to his mouth, chewed it gently, and then took a bite of the rice. It's better to mix it raw and delicious, but after drying it, I always feel a bit lacking in freshness. Not very satisfied, but it's better than dry pickled vegetables. So no longer distracted, he vigorously picked up his chopsticks and comforted his constantly rumbling stomach. Qingtai Mountain is located south of the river, near the famous Lansang River for its treacherous beaches and drowning. It stretches for over 1,000 miles and is surrounded on 3 sides. The only gap, however, is also the back against the vast jungle, where there are countless snakes, insects, and beasts. The tall forests and ancient trees are everywhere, lush, even standing on the mountaintop is difficult to see at a glance. Although the river is dangerous, the mountain is just a small hill. Even some of them are exquisite and small, far inferior to the towering peaks and ridges in all directions. Not to mention its beauty and splendor. Even if a Taoist temple is built on the mountain, it is far from eye-catching because it is too common. Heading east, north, and south, for 30 to 50 miles each, with your eyes closed, you can find many temples that also worship various true rulers. Without any sense of uniqueness, it naturally cannot attract any pilgrims or scholars, and as for those literati and literati who sell poetry everywhere, there are even fewer contacts. In fact, in Shizhou, most Taoist temples are like this, with no significant difference. Moreover, Yunhe Temple has neither a grand story nor a prominent Taoist figure, and can only rank in the middle among the surrounding dozens of temples, with few people praising and remembering it. But ultimately, there are still some differences, otherwise it would not have been possible to inherit it for 5 generations, especially in this turbulent and tragic year. For over 40 years, the emperors at the foot of the mountain have been replaced one after another, at least 7 or 8 of them. Along with the purple gold and glass crown in Janya city, countless people have worn it. The world is chaotic, and the people place their hopes on ghosts and gods. So every day, there are new temples built, but they always rise and fall, spinning up and down, as if rootless duckweed is blown by the wind, and the waves ripple in the chaotic beacon fire and smoke. With the emergence of strong people and rampant bandits, few can persist for decades. But all of this is at the foot of the mountain, and it has little to do with the Yunhe temple, which is supported by only one Guanju on Qingtai mountain. At this moment, after having lunch, Chen Yu, who had just tidied up the dishes, was moving his body and bones, taking a walk to digest his food. I walked around the temple twice, first to see the vegetable garden that has been cultivated since the previous temple owner was still alive, and has been repaired and maintained until today. I went to the half-acre square field that I had worked hard to weed and plow in the morning, preparing for sowing spring wheat. The vegetable garden is full of vitality. After all, it's spring and the cold winter is far away, and business is thriving. The small terraced land is filled with a variety of vegetables, including familiar ones such as beans and vegetables, as well as specialties such as jade insect clothing, white sticks, and orchid fruits. Oh, by the way, yuchong-yi is the main raw material for making stuffy white dried rice. You can see that a corner of the vegetable garden, which should have been tender green and sprouting white, is now unbearable. The sprouts that have emerged have been picked clean, and the stems have been pinched high and short, uneven. Chen Yu, however, didn't care. This thing was like the chives in his memory, full of resilience, and it didn't take long to grow again after a stubble. Just need to determine the time to avoid sprouting, flowering, and fruiting directly if it grows too long. It will be too old and not delicious at that time. After walking for a while, he gradually lost his sense of excitement and didn't rush to open a canal to dig fields. But instead, he went to the bedroom and took a yellowed scripture book, lying on a wooden chair, flipping the book in his hand to the fold with a comfortable posture, and focusing on flipping through it. After digestion, it's natural to take a nap at noon. Chen Yu flipped through it, even though he had already read it once, he still read it with relish and couldn't take his eyes off. Although the font is different from Chinese characters, it has a similar shape and is equally square and powerful. And his predecessor, who was praised and read from a young age, naturally became familiar with him as he inherited his memories. Turning his gaze back, he landed on the face mask and saw two characters written. Changfeng. The Changfeng Classic is one of the only 5 Taoist books in the Yunhe temple. Not only that, but it is also well known among Taoist families in this world, and most Taoist children have heard of it to some extent. Of course, this is not incredibly precious, but the real reason is that this Taoist scripture has been widely circulated. In other words, the street is rotten. It is estimated that not many Taoist temples will be lacking. Chen Yu thinks it's okay. Yunhe temple is already an ordinary small temple, so how can one expect to have the priceless treasure scriptures and heavenly books? Moreover, if the memories left by our predecessors are correct, it seems that there are no supernatural techniques from the fantasy literature of the previous life in this world. There are both martial arts and martial arts in the martial arts world, as well as combat techniques such as flying eaves and walls, chopping bricks and breaking wood. Only without the high martial arts ability to move mountains and gather mountains, and the golden elixir immortal method that allows my life to be determined by me and not by heaven. Even more so, the theories of Neijia True Qi and 3 treasures Yuanshan were not revealed at this time. The current Taoist techniques, like ordinary martial artists, have been trained with a certain amount of strength, and the called eating qi, eating mist, drinking dew, and tasting wind, have been developed to reflect the state of mind and thoughts. Both are still within the ordinary range, and they rely entirely on their own time and effort to practice. Therefore, the preciousness of Taoist scriptures varies greatly. Its value depends more on content, history, author, and so on. Even the most precious Taoist scriptures in the world cannot make people suddenly realize and soar in place at a glance. So, looking at which one is not reading. Furthermore, being able to spread widely in this world where Taoism is flourishing indicates that its content has been recognized by the majority of Taoist disciples. Anyway, Chen Yu thinks that the content of this Changfeng Jing is excellent. In other words, in the construction of a simple materialist worldview and the idealistic aspect of expressing beliefs, some statements are worth observing, and there are also some meaningful words and phrases. There were several passages that he almost thought he was reading the famous Tao Te Ching. It can only be said that in the process of exploring the deepest and most profound principles of heaven and earth, certain thoughts and insights will always be closely related. Thinking of this, Chen Yu flipped to the homepage and glanced at the author of the scripture. Mingxia Gong. He remembered that there seemed to be a porcelain statue of him or her in the main hall of worship, with a high status, second only to the statue of the Heavenly Lord. Sure enough, those who can say such things are all big shots. Target audience. New author. Feed. Recommended tickets, comments. Welcome to Feed. Chapter 3. Earthworms, 4 comments. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Earthworms, 4 comments. After reading the scriptures, I unconsciously fell asleep. Until she woke up, Chen Yu stretched lazily while putting an end to today's lunch break. I went to the kitchen and scooped a scoop of cold well water from the water tank, filled the water bag, and tied it around my waist. Looking up at the sky, I felt that the sun above was too bright, so I had to wear a bamboo hat to cover it up and avoid falling to the ground due to heatstroke for a while. I don't want to work. He murmured, but he still carried his dirt bag and walked out of the Taoist temple towards the dirt field. The workload in the afternoon is not very heavy, and it is estimated that there will be a sunny day in the next few days. But Chen Yu has a plan, and since he has agreed on how much he wants to achieve today, even if he doesn't finish it at all, he will find it difficult to let go. Why not set off early, even under the scorching sun, to finish the work at hand? The most important thing is, we must not delay tomorrow's wild fishing, as it is a big deal. Before going out, he would not forget the bamboo tube with earthworms at the side of the column. He would take it with him. Later, he would dig earth and open a canal. Maybe he could add more brothers and sisters to the little ones inside. At this point, there is an extra one, and tomorrow there may be several more. Chen Yu was thinking to himself, wondering how his luck would be tomorrow. Taoist temple. It's okay to close for a day. Anyway, this place is remote, and it's rare to see a virtuous person come to your door every 10 days and a half months. Morning gift. He is a fake Taoist with half a bucket of water, so he doesn't need to follow those rules and regulations. Offering. If possible, just order 2 more before departure tomorrow morning. I believe the Heavenly Lord will not mind his elderly family. In front of the courtyard, 2 rows of peach trees stand tall. Chen Yu, who passed by, looked up and down, and saw that sprouts had already begun to sprout on it. He was dressed in new green leaves, and the green and glossy appearance was very pleasing. Speaking of these peach trees, there is really a story to tell. The peach tree was originally planted by the first generation of the temple master, but after several renovations and changes in the Yunhe temple, the old tree died and moved for decades. Some of the trees that are now growing vigorously were planted by the previous temple master, the old Taoist, when he first graduated, and some were planted by his predecessor when he took over the position of the temple master. That is to say, there is an unwritten rule in Yunhe temple, which is that the new temple mainly plants a few trees and places them in front of the Taoist temple. It is estimated that the previous abbot who established this tacit understanding thought that one day, the branches and leaves of Yunhe temple in Qingtai mountain can also form a forest, with green shade like a wild field. However, there were unexpected circumstances. Not only did the tree species left by the previous generations disappear completely, but the old master and his predecessor almost died on the spot. If it weren't for Chen Yu's timely arrival, there would probably be only a desolate scene in front of this gate. Because he wanted to eat peaches in summer and also to find something to do for himself, he spent the first time after waking up, besides cooking and researching food, thinking about how to save the peach tree every morning and night. Perhaps it was fate, but in the end, he didn't know how to do it. Anyway, the peach tree survived in a daze. Being able to shade and eat peaches is undoubtedly a good thing. Damn it. Dao was thrown aside, picked up the iron hoe on the side and carried it on his shoulder. Yu didn't change his clothes just to do his work. Always wearing this work uniform, not afraid of getting wet or dirty. Hey. Take 3 or 2 steps to reach the expected position, stand still, gesture, and then dig down with a hoe. After a muffled sound, the mud clump flipped out of the ground and was smashed before being pushed aside. Gradually, a low and shallow soil ditch appeared beneath my feet, while the sides on either side were piled up with soil. He shook off his arm and used a hoe to hook the nearby soil bag handle, pulled it in front of him, then stepped on the front end with his feet, pressed it tightly, and pressed it against the bottom of the tail end. The hands kept moving, and the iron hoe inserted into the pile of soil, easily hooking and grabbing most of the soil into the pocket. So back and forth, the 2 earthen bags were packed to the brim. After wiping his sweat, Yu picked up the soil bag and carried it to a distant corner to dump. After returning, he continued to wield his hoe and dig. Time passed, and in the blink of an eye, it was evening. At this point, Yu had already put down his iron hoe and had just picked up and dumped the last load of soil. End of work. Taking away the mud and dust, he looked at the ditch surrounding the fields in front of him with a smile on his face. Finally finished, the next steps are soil plowing and sowing, but it's not urgent. Both tasks can only start after Pinyu. Before that, he can rest well for a period of time. However, when Yu picked up the bamboo tube that was almost filled with earthworms, he realized that he still had something serious to do. I almost forgot about it. With a murmur, he picked up his soil bag and hoe and walked towards the Taoist temple. Returning to the courtyard, Yu simply washed his sticky body with 2 buckets of water. After feeling much refreshed, he changed into a green and black Taoist robe, gathered his hair into a ball, and fixed it on the top with bamboo hairpins. Ji is a hairpin. In my memory, besides the 5 volumes of Taoist scriptures and the present-day Taoist robe he wears, there is also a transparent jade hairpin passed down from generation to generation in Yunhe temple. Unfortunately, it was lost several years ago during a downhill training of an old Taoist. At that time, 2 senior brothers and 1 junior brother of his predecessor were also missing. The Yunhe temple also suffered a complete decline from this. Before that, although not well known, Taoist temples still had a lot of incense in dozens of villages, towns, and even Xia County at the foot of the mountain. The number of pilgrims who came and went was not many, but it was not rare. Like now, there is no one around until the end of January. Fortunately, Yu doesn't mind, let alone that obsession. Without the jade hairpin, there would still be a bamboo hairpin. If we had to deal with the incense and fire warriors who were destined to come up the mountain one day, his short hair would have been shaved and cut clean by him long ago. How could we have done so many things? Suppressing his thoughts, Yu smacked his lips. To be honest, he really wanted to shave his head and wear a Taoist robe. He sat under the solemn statue of Tao Zu, holding a brush and reciting the Taoist scriptures and singing his name to the pilgrims. The scene was particularly strange to think of. Shaking his head to dispel these out-of-tune thoughts, he picked up a bamboo tube in his hand, followed by a plate from the kitchen, and then flipped the tube upside down. After shaking it a few times, he saw a red and plump earthworm landing on the plate. Tighten the lid and place it in place. Yu's gaze returned to this earthworm. After pondering for a moment, he saw him extend his fingers and gently press against the other person's slightly muddy surface. The earthworms are still wriggling and climbing, somewhat afraid of light. However, at this moment, Yu didn't care at all. He closed his eyes and his mind sank into the depths of his consciousness. After a brief moment of confusion, a strand of white light shone out like sky light. Like rain and mist, silver light lingers endlessly. The outside world didn't show any signs, but in that chaotic and hazy ocean of consciousness, a huge wave stirred up. The waves are surging and mist rises. Countless ethereal lights flew out of the sea, most of which dissipated suddenly, with only a few being captured by inexplicable forces and gathered in a corner. Coagulation and solidification. Transformed into tiny dots of light, quietly suspended. At this moment, Qingyu pried the area and wrapped one of them in front of him. With a thought, he pushed his consciousness from his fingertips into the earthworm's body. For a long time, Qingyu finally opened his eyes. He let out a long sigh and withdrew his fingers, kneading them back and forth. He felt the bones of his fingers tingling, as if they had been frozen in ice water for 3 to 5 quarters in the cold winter of 2019. Rubbing it twice, he turned his gaze and looked at the earthworm on the plate. Although it was originally red, he could vaguely see that there was a slight dimness at the link, but now it has changed its appearance, red and bright like flames, without any speckles. The body is round and the smell of the soil is gone. The circular white discharge that was originally hanging on the body is missing. Looking at the whole body, it looks more like a piece of art carved from red jade than the original long bug. The changes are not insignificant. Of course, having had several experiences, he is well aware that the real change is just beginning. Even if he doesn't invest much this time, it won't be easy for the earthworm in front of him to digest it in a short while. However, no matter how it changes, it is still just an earthworm and cannot become a giant dragon. Qingyu put it away and planned to see it again tomorrow. If the result is really unsatisfactory, just feed the fish. I believe this red and strong earthworm will definitely attract many big fish. In this way, at least tomorrow's bait will be very appropriate. Please be so handsome and beautiful, please leave a comment. Degree. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Practice after rain, 4 comments. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Practice after rain, 4 comments. Spread out your palm, a flicker of silver light flickered. It looks very dazzling. But the flames froze and extinguished in just an instant, and the splendor that overflowed most of the courtyard was completely subdued. It still doesn't work. He shook his head and let out a sigh, but his face remained calm and seemingly accustomed to it. Spirit machine, this is Qinyu's term for the silver-white light particles produced in the self-consciousness sea. Although I thought it might be a gift that came with me from my hometown, also known as the Golden Finger. But there is no explanation, everything is still being explored, and there is still a long way to truly control it. The function of the spirit machine is also very vague, seemingly similar to the vulgar reinforcement flow, but he is well aware of the difference between the two after conducting several experiments. Very big, even fundamentally different. Reinforcement is only superficial, and the true function of the spiritual machine is reflected at a deeper level. Unfortunately, until now he had only a vague understanding and could not figure it out. After a rough grasp, he had a guess. It was precisely this speculation that led him to give the name, Spirit Machine. If it's really what he thinks, then this ability would be very interesting. Whether it's strong or not, let's not say, the key is. It's fun. Nowadays, limited by Qingyu himself, if one really wants to use it, they not only need to hold their breath and concentrate, spend a lot of energy to pry open the sea of consciousness, but also need to have direct contact with the other person, just like the earthworms before. There are significant limitations, but fortunately, he is not currently working on any monster fighting or upgrading work, so there is no need to use it to fight against enemies. Qingyu is very open-minded, just take it slow and not in a hurry. In early spring, the sky changes as it says. Even though the sun was shining brightly earlier, the sun was shining brightly and dazzling. As a result, 2 gusts of fresh breeze blew, and 3 or 5 clusters of white clouds swayed and gathered in a pile. You squeeze me, I squeeze you. Before long, the dull and thunderous thunder leaked out from the gaps in the clouds, resounding through the mountains and forests. Oh, my goodness! Looking up at the sky, reaching out his hand and feeling the gentle breeze enveloping the drizzle. Qianyu, who had just set up his earthworm tube and planned to go behind the mountain to chop bamboo, lowered his head and glanced towards the mountain path outside the courtyard. At first glance, clusters of bluestones and grass are all bathed in the rain. TSK, it seems that this fish has drifted in the water. The rain is not really heavy, but it is precisely this seemingly insignificant drizzle that is most likely to cause harm. Especially on this mountain range, if the road is obstructed and long, and the foot is slightly slippery, the probability of accidents will suddenly increase by tens of thousands. For Qianyu, although he looks forward to wild fishing, there is no need to take the risk of hitting the mountain path and leaving no bones to wander around the mountain streams and pools. Forget it, let's wait until next time. Thinking about it, I looked at the 2 bamboo tubes on the pillar again. Who knows when these little ones will be able to make the most of their resources. Perhaps they also hope to play their role as soon as possible. Earthworms. Putting down the firewood knife in his hand and the basket on his back, Qianyu decided to lie on the chair and continue flipping through the scriptures. Waiting for the rain to end. In the evening, the sun slanted westward on the far back of the mountain, and the dim sky and faint evening glow complemented each other, reflecting in the distance. The rain stopped, but Qianyu didn't go out to chop bamboo. He moved his body and bones, and then stood in the courtyard, practicing his skills in the cool weather after the clouds and rain. The mountain path is still slippery, so he thinks it's better to wait until it dries tomorrow before discussing anything else. The most important thing is that he couldn't figure out the weather was cloudy and sunny. Although it was clear for thousands of miles yesterday and even in the morning, he thought it would be generally sunny in the next few days, but unfortunately, a drizzle drifted down and he had no choice. In the courtyard, Qianyu lifted his breath and after a few brief sips, his body suddenly spread out. I saw him stepping on the 3 talons formation, pressing 2 points on each side, sometimes jumping and sometimes lying down, like an agile galloping horse leaping incessantly. His fists turned into swords, and his cuffs swung into the air, making a crackling sound. The sound was clear and crisp, but it couldn't compare to the movement and stillness of stepping on my feet, and even the sea breathing and breathing between my chest and abdomen couldn't compare. The chest and abdomen swelled and contracted like a bellows twitching, and the wheezing and suffocating sound disturbed my ears. Upon closer inspection, there seemed to be an inexplicable rhythm. The martial arts that Qianyu was practicing at this time were called Yunhe Gong, also known as Baihe Feishan Ju. Like the Changfeng Jing, placed on a chair, it is one of the only 5 remaining Taoist books in the temple. In my memory, the old Taoist once told his predecessor that this martial arts was created by the 2nd-generation ancestor of Yunhe Temple, taking the meaning of the white crane wearing feathers carrying mountains and seas under the sky and sea. Balancing movement and stillness, purifying the mind, and achieving great success can strengthen the body, and prolong life. Just hearing this may seem valuable, but Qianyu knows that this technique is only second-rate. In the martial arts world below the mountain, only those inexperienced bandits or reckless men will fight for it. Those who truly have a family background will probably not see it much. However, this skill alone is enough. This was something that Qianyu had only heard of in his previous life but had never seen before. Qianyu felt novel and did not mind the level of kung fu itself. Moreover, the content of the martial arts stored in the Taoist temple is complete, including not only the pile technique for refining qi in blood, but also the breathing technique for condensing qi and strengthening breath, including fist and foot polishing, enemy fighting techniques, strength adjustment, and the use of swords and weapons. Even worse, there is a supporting vertical step method. Practice, tactics, weapons, footwork. Through this book of second-rate martial arts, he could see that the martial arts in this world were not so simple and easy to practice. Unlike what is portrayed on TV, it can be achieved by playing long and short punches and sitting quietly for 10.5 days. Practicing martial arts is really difficult. There is a lot of content that can be practiced, but it is unclear whether it is a bone problem or something else. In short, Chen Yu's progress in Yunhe Gong is average. Although I have a good understanding, there are some actions that I just can't do, and I need several extra times to adjust them forcefully. This is probably the average qualification among the neighboring population. Fortunately, he was quite happy practicing on his own, obviously not taking these things to heart. After a brief blow, her skin turned red. After taking a few breaths, Chen Yu wiped away the sweat from her face and neck. Not much progress in martial arts, but the benefits are quite obvious. At least he felt that his body had become more active during this period of time, unlike the faint feeling he had at the beginning. My predecessor also practiced martial arts, but at a young age, my mind was mixed. In my sleep and dreams, I always thought about the magnificent scenery below the mountain, thinking about being able to wield a sword and travel far and wide, practicing chivalry and justice. It would be best to have one or two more beautiful women with you, and a meeting of gold, jade, and dew would surpass countless others in the world. So my martial arts skills fell behind. When Chen Yu arrived, he didn't even catch up with the heat and his body was almost cooling through. I finally managed to stop the loss and defeat of my chi and blood, and forcibly suspended my life hanging on the front line. It is estimated that this experience has worsened the already not wealthy qualifications, and now practicing martial arts is twice as effective. In contrast, the Taoist practice that emphasizes understanding, luck, and spirituality is more friendly to him. The Taoist scriptures only focus on the cultivation of nature and the cultivation of the mind. One cannot fly over roofs or walls, and the other cannot have chi and blood like dragons. Chen Yu enjoys reading books, which has been shared in 2 lifetimes. He has almost transformed from a hobby to a habit, feeling uncomfortable every day without reading. Besides, he doesn't plan to give up on his martial arts skills. It's always good to be strong and fit. If you don't see countless people down the mountain, how many can hold a complete martial arts secret book? Being content and always happy is the true way. Please have one thing: if there are any misspellings, please lift your little finger and come out immediately. Thank you, degree. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Dao Mai Fa Pai, seeking comments. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Dao Mai Fa Pai, seeking comments. Clouds roll and stretch, it's another sunny day. On Qingtai Mountain, the Taoist temple is hidden in the mountains and forests, and the sound of Lang reciting and reading comes from it. A pure person, if they hear without words, eat without regrets, and have no influence in their words and actions, then it is due to their heart and nature. Sincerity is the ultimate reason that never stops. Gai Mingming, the wind fades away, observing the heavens and the earth. My gaze fell on the courtyard, but I saw a young man wearing a grey short coat, with exposed arms, holding a thread-bound book and reading it with relish. This is not Changfeng, but another Taoist book. The book is called Huajing 10 Lives Record. Compared to the former, the content in front of me is more obscure, with the entire text telling the words of clear mind and pure thoughts, and occasionally mixed with the academic terminology of this world. Ordinary people may read it in just 3 to 5 sentences and feel dizzy, making it difficult to read. However, Chen Yu is different. Not only does he not have difficulties, but he becomes more and more popular as he reads. Unlike the ultimate convergence and flow of Taoism in previous lives, there is no unified theory of Taoism in this life, and many theories are flourishing. Within the southern Daliang region alone, there exist dozens or hundreds of different schools of thought. Moreover, new Taoist ideas often flow out of a certain major school of ancient temples, which have been hotly discussed by countless Taoist scholars. There are those who praise and praise, but there are also those who are angry and resistant. Having traveled for thousands of years, the waves washed away the sand, and the vast majority of theories fell silent and disappeared, but there are still some that have been passed down. As far as our predecessors know, there are only 5 Taoist schools that can be considered prestigious in terms of Taoism, and we do not know much about the 3 northern branches, so we will not discuss them for now. When it comes to the most famous one in memory, it still belongs to Jingjiang Temple, which has stood on the southern boundary of the Great River for hundreds of years, and Jinwu Mountain, which has been granted imperial edicts by several dynasties. One believes in Qianyang, while the other upholds Qingwei. The 2 factions can be said to be at the peak of incense, jointly holding the ox ears of the world's Taoism. The Guangyun Luan 5 Elements Book and Mingshan Lu, which are preserved in the 5 Taoist books of Yunhe Temple, are derived from these 2 lineages. The former is as broad and diverse as the Changfeng Jing, which is a leisurely book similar to the Wild Chronicles. The latter is slightly more profound and can be discussed in conjunction with his Huajing 10 Lives record, which records the thoughts and ideas of a Taoist master in Jingjiang Temple about the lifelong pursuit of the Tao and Zi, among other Taoist disciples. Often learned during research, rather than just a superficial introduction. As a Taoist temple master within the territory of Daliang, Qin Yu couldn't help but delve into it. Of course, his predecessor was not proficient in learning and did not leave any unique insights. In the end, he still needs to grind and understand the words in the books bit by bit. In terms of reading, the memory in the brain is of limited use. In a blink of an eye, more than half an hour passed. Qin Yu closed his book and practiced cloud crane skill several times according to the gradually proficient steps. After moving his body, he took a firewood knife and basket to the back mountain. Yesterday, a light rain came down, wetting the mountain road. Today, the weather is still clear, and the bright red sun rose early from behind the mountain. The dew was dry, and the rugged blue stones were no longer wet, so he planned to take advantage of this day to prepare for wild fishing first. By now, the hooks, fishing lines, and bait are all in good condition, except for a durable and lightweight fishing rod. The bamboo behind the mountain has good toughness and grows slender, making it an excellent material. Qin Yu, who was backed by a bamboo forest, naturally didn't need to sacrifice his proximity in distance to go to the county town at the foot of the mountain for another trip. After all, the fishing rods of this era are not much different, let alone metal fishing rods. They are all made of bamboo, and at most, there are some differences in the category of bamboo. Instead of spending that effort, it's better to make one yourself. Coincidentally, Yamada outside the Taoist temple doesn't need to do much lately, and he has some leisure time. There are only a few books, obviously it's impossible to read day and night, flipping back and forth. As for practicing martial arts, it is even more impossible. Kung Fu emphasizes a balance between work and rest, and a balance between relaxation and relaxation. Excessive exercise will only strain muscles and damage the body. Too much is not enough, but it is not beautiful. Stepping on the mountain path, avoiding some still slightly damp places, he continued up the way. Speaking of wild fishing, Qin Yu remembered the big red earthworm he had infused with a spiritual machine yesterday. Unfortunately, when I woke up this morning, my body was already stiff, but strangely, there was no strong fishy smell after the death of an ordinary earthworm. Moreover, a few flesh tendons protruded from the head of the earthworm, forming a ring that looked like a crown at first glance. Earthworm King, collapse. The experiment failed, and it has been proven that the psychic mechanism still cannot act in animals. However, due to the number of experiments and sample size, this conclusion may have been hastily drawn. It's impossible to say that his experimental method was wrong, or maybe the results would be different if he were tested on someone else. But seeing the other party's twisted flesh crown, as if it had grown hard from the head, Qin Yu silently gave up the idea of trying on himself. Let's take it slow for now, let's wait until we have a deeper understanding of the spirit machine. The earthworm died, but Qin Yu did not throw it away. Instead, it was still placed alone in another bamboo tube. As he said before the experiment, it doesn't matter if you fail, you can just use it for fishing. Ready-made bait. But soon he thought of what would happen to the fish that ate this earthworm if it had undergone some bad changes, such as being highly toxic. Can it still be eaten? Feeling his chin and pondering for a moment, Qingyu realized that the best way to deal with it was to fish and raise it first, and see what happened afterwards. The mountain road is rugged, and even Qingyu, who has become familiar with the Taoist temple in recent months, has put in a lot of effort and walked a distance before finally winding around the stone slope. At first glance, the green grass grew wildly, many of which were below ankle height. They were clustered together, some lying in the shadow of rocks, deeply rooted in the earth. Some cater to the sunrise and sway with the wind. Behind the small and gentle grassland, there are large and straight bamboo patches, slender and dense, with narrow and long bamboo leaves hanging upside down like blades on the branches. Qingyu turned around and saw towering mountains and misty scenery, with a faint mist lingering on the top of the hill, emitting a beautiful halo under the increasingly intense sunlight. Then it slowly dispersed. Seeing this scene, although he didn't shout as loudly as in movies and TV dramas, his mood did become a bit cheerful, and he seemed to blend in with the scenery in front of him, shedding his shackles and becoming more comfortable. No wonder there are always hermits who like to burrow into some secluded and remote mountains, and sometimes the feeling of letting themselves go is not bad. Ha! Qinyu's mind fluctuated, and he fell into a deep consciousness. When he arrived at the familiar and hazy sea of consciousness, he found that it had unexpectedly calmed down a lot. On the contrary, the light dots floating out of the seabed, when condensed by an inexplicable power network, have stabilized slightly, unlike before, disappearing in an instant. Is it the change caused by the mood just now? Just before he took a few breaths, when he felt as if he was about to return in the wind, a faint wave came from the depths of his consciousness. At this moment, it shouldn't be a bad thing. Qingyu looked at the calm sea of consciousness, which was the first time he had encountered such tranquility in a long time. The usual time he entered here was when the waves were surging and the raging waves were raging. What is that? At this moment, curious as he looked around, he suddenly noticed that there seemed to be a faint membrane in the corner where the spiritual machine light dots had condensed and gathered. I didn't pay attention in the past, or in other words, the past was covered by the waves. At this moment, it becomes visible and eye-catching. He quickly leaned closer, but only had time to take a rough glance up and down. In the next moment, the sea of consciousness became active again. Quickly, the waves rolled up and patted in front of me, and the elusive thin film disappeared. Externally, Qingyu awakened his mind and opened his eyes. With a hint of contemplation in his eyes, he now realized that his soul seemed to have many problems. Whether it was the vast and constantly fluctuating ocean of consciousness, the inexplicable silver and white dots of light, or the spiritual machine condensed from the dots, it was difficult to explain them with common sense. A normal person is definitely not like this, at least their past self and their original predecessor do not have this kind of abnormality. Time travel. Qingyu couldn't explain his current mood clearly, it was very complicated, but in the end, he still smiled freely, think so much and do so much. Anyway, I'm not at a loss. After thinking about it, I turned around and entered the bamboo forest. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Dao Mai Fa Pai, 2, please comment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Dao Mai Fa Pai, 2, please comment. Dude. The sharp firewood knife fell, leaving a large gap in the emerald green bamboo body. Qingyu held the knife very steadily and struck the side at the same height with another knife. The two openings are facing each other, and the hollow bamboo core is exposed. I saw him gently push, and with a snap, the entire bamboo suddenly broke and toppled, with a clattering sound of bamboo leaves before finally falling to the ground. Take a few steps forward, grab the middle section and lift it up to look and gesture in front of you. After a moment, shake your head and let out a sigh, then put it back on the ground. Behind him, there were also many zebras lying horizontally, about 10 or so, varying in height, and weight, but obviously none of them could satisfy him. Rolling up his sleeves, Qingtai continued to choose. In fact, his demands are not really high. He just stands on the ground and can't see the parts covered by the branches and leaves clearly. So he chose several lower parts that he liked, but all of them went wrong in the middle and upper parts, either twisted or too thick. Fortunately, there are enough bamboo pipes here, so you don't have to worry about not finding them. Bugu bugu, the sun gradually rose to the top of the clouds, and it was time for noon. The chirping of birds becomes louder and louder, with different calls echoing in the mountains and forests. Wow! The grass cluster trembled, and a bare bamboo flew out of it and fell to the ground. Then Qingtai leaned out, still covered in fallen leaves, picking and looking down. The bamboo body is green, and the originally growing branches have been shaved clean by him. It feels not smooth to the touch and has a slight prickly sensation like fuzz. I tried the hand feeling before, it was careless, but there are still a few more steps to follow. I'm sure it won't be too bad when the finished product comes out. Fishing for a small fish in the mountains should not be a problem. Qingtai Mountain is surrounded by the river on 3 sides, but the Yunhe temple is located closer to the west, which is the direction of the Baiqi Mountains. There are many mountains and hills, but few rivers and lakes. In the mountains, there is no shortage of cold pools and deep springs, and there are also many murmuring mountain streams. However, this kind of place cannot raise big fish. The water pool that Qingtai originally wanted to go to is located in the dense forest, surrounded by a few large stones, which is a natural deep pool. Someone talks big things out loud, but in fact, they have a clear understanding of what is going on. Fishing, the key is fishing, not fish. Looking back at the moment, Qingtai, who had chopped off the green bamboo, did not directly return to the Taoist temple. Instead, he carried the bamboo down the slope and placed it at the intersection. He then tightened his shoulder and carried the basket tightly, turning around and taking another path. The purpose of coming out this morning is not just to chop down a bamboo. Trekking along the path, towering and rugged against the rocks on both sides, the firewood knife in hand occasionally slashes and slashes, cutting through the thorns and thorns blocking the way. The bushes and grass in this mountain are growing so fast. It's only been half a month since last time, and the same road was broken a lot at that time. In just about 10 days, it has become particularly lush again. Qingtai rises up and follows this small path that was stepped on at an unknown time, straight into the depths of Qingtai Mountain. Quickly, Qingyan gradually receded and the terrain became gentle. After 2 more moments, hills with ancient wooden roots fell into his eyes. Green is lush. But this time, I didn't just drill straight into the forest, but walked along the edge all the way. As he walked forward and reminisced, he soon arrived at a depression. Ahead, a deep pit is half hidden under the lawn, and the yellow soil emerges from the ground, revealing broken roots and stems of grass and trees. After taking a few more steps and bowing down, there was a steep cliff, 7 or 8 zhang high, with a piece of dead wood lying on the bottom rock. The wood, which only left half of its body, was covered in moss and green grass. The bark cracked open, and there seemed to be a pitch-black hole leaning against the stone wall, as if it had been dug up by some animal to make a home. Qingtai only glanced and then withdrew his gaze. He came to the edge of the cliff, half a step away from the deep pit, and didn't dare to approach, so as not to accidentally step on it and fall. The soil layer in this place is not very solid, otherwise it wouldn't have collapsed in last month's heavy rain, along with this big tree falling down. Leave a big hole. He bent down and searched along the mountain wall, and soon seemed to have made a discovery. His eyes suddenly lit up. I saw a serrated fern grass attached to a crevice somewhere. The most I got catching is the orange fruit wrapped in grass leaves. Sure enough, it's ripe. Qingtai had sharp eyes and saw faint red spots on the fruit. So without delay, the person lay on the ground and directly reached out to touch it. Grab the grass body with a big hand and pull out the leaves and roots with a slight force. After getting up and taking a closer look, I found that there was not only one fruit inside, but only a few orange ones. Most of the others were either green and astringent or had already decayed. However, Qingyu was quite satisfied. A month and a half ago, when he was climbing the mountain, he accidentally saw this orange-silver grass. At that time, he saw that the fruit was still small, so he waited for more than a month. Today, he thought of taking a look on the way and it was indeed ripe. After flipping through the grass leaves and counting them carefully, there are a total of 4 orange-silver fruits. According to the recipe in memory, 1 box of Baiyun San should be enough. If there are enough ingredients, there may be another box available. Baiyun San is a prescription he discovered while sorting out his predecessor's memories, and is not considered a famous pill. After all, Yunhe Temple has always upheld the principle of purity, and is considered a member of the Pure Brightness School, without the inheritance of the Dan Ding School. Among the 4 major sects of Dharma, namely Dan Ding, He Sha, Shan Fu, and Jing Ming, only the Dan Ding sect specializes in lead and mercury, and other sects are rarely involved. However, the Dan Ding method was not very popular among the Taoist community in Daliang. The Zhengyang Temple, which was regarded as the leader, followed the path of combining evil spirits and practicing the pure brightness method. Only Jinwu Mountain has opened a secondary meridian in recent decades, called Lingdan Peak, and specializes in the Dan Ding technique, but the other mainstream is still the Hesha technique. Due to the flourishing of Taoism, there are different factions in different regions. Systematically speaking, the Tao gates in this world can be distinguished according to the following 3 categories. Firstly, based on the theory of Tao meridians, such as the Zhengyang Temple and Jinwu Mountain mentioned earlier, it is a prominent sect in the world. Secondly, in order to study theory, there are 4 major paths: the True One Path, the Clear Micro Path, the Qianyang Path, and the Taiping Path. Although the Zhengyang Temple and the Jinwu Mountain practice the same evil, they each adhere to different academic principles. Thirdly, the practice of practicing the Dharma is called the Dharma School. Specifically, these are the 4 mentioned above. Taoism emphasizes the cultivation of mental nature while also pursuing freedom, relaxation, and the cultivation of qi and longevity. However, to his knowledge, so far no one has truly developed something. Those who have only achieved great success in speaking and practicing, and even skyrocketed in the daytime, cannot be sure whether they are sensationalized or have developed hallucinations due to their foolish minds. Nowadays, the vast majority of the realm of practicing Buddhism is still just a Taoist fantasy, stuck in books and theories. At least Qingyu has read the Huajing 10 Lives record, which specifically discusses the cultivation of the pure brightness method, and when it comes to the specific realm, it is either vague or vague, only providing a general description. This level needs to be like this, and then it can be like this. Alright, the rest is up to the Taoist friends to understand on their own. It can be called a brain-racing competition. But on the other hand, no matter how illusory or unreal the thoughts of these masters of Taoism may be, at least their underlying ideas have not changed. In terms of meditation, enlightenment, and the foundation of education, what they have written is still commendable. This is also the reason why Qingyu likes to read Taoist scriptures. It's both interesting and philosophical, who doesn't love it? Put the orange-silver grass into the waist bag that you wear close to your body. As for the backpack, it is used to hold other things. After tidying up properly, Qingyu finally bent into the lush forest on the side. Without taking 2 steps, I saw a gray top covered in snow. White inside, like an umbrella, hiding in a corner of the tree root. He had a bright smile on his face. Good guy. He opened the store as soon as he arrived. Sorry, I forgot the time. I only realized it after dinner. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Mushroom Deer Bamboo, 4 comments. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Mushroom Deer Bamboo, 4 comments. As the sun approached noon, I didn't realize it when I was wandering in the forest, but as soon as I came out, I suddenly realized that the sun above was already shining brightly. The sky in March may not be scorching, but it already carries a hint of warmth compared to Ladom. Fortunately, the position at my feet was higher, and the wind from the mountaintop brushed my face, dissipating the heat. Thanks to the perseverance in recent months, although my martial arts skills have not improved significantly, my physique has become much stronger. My complexion is rosy and healthy, and I have finally taken on the appearance of a young person. Unlike before, when blood was depleted and qi was broken, he looked frail as if he had just recovered from a serious illness. At the top of the mountain, Qingyu squatted on a large blue stone to rest for a while. Although the dense forest obscured the sun, it was still a bit stuffy and hot. Coupled with the need to avoid the entanglement of tree branches and thorny shrubs, I sweated a lot and my clothes on my back were soaked, as if I could hold on to the water. But everything is worth it. Pulling over the basket placed next to me, I saw that the originally empty interior was now packed in a thick stack. Red, yellow, and white are mixed together, with mushroom blooms as bright and pure as snow, as well as those stained with soil and dew, but they are all scattered with a natural smell of mushrooms, mixed with mud and grass and wood fragrance. They are pure and not strong. Qingyu reached out and pulled, pinching 2 mushrooms and caressing them in his palm, feeling satisfied. The basket is not big, let alone full, but it is roughly estimated to weigh at least 3 or 4 pounds. Eating 3 or 5 meals is definitely enough. Speaking of which, he hasn't eaten wild mushrooms for a long time. In an instant, he couldn't help but stroll a long string of steaming hot dishes in his mind, including the methods he used in his previous life in his hometown's countryside, as well as the local dishes he had tasted in the Qingtai area. Make people's fingers twitch. Let's go back and cook a bowl of fresh soup first. It has to be said that the forest after the rain is truly rich in resources. Along the way, he actually abandoned a lot, only relying on his memory to select those that are delicious or easy to cook, and still picked a lot. Sure, come back next time. Unfortunately, he couldn't find the medicine for Bai Yun-san. With the main medicine, orange silver fruit, Qingyu naturally wanted to try his luck in the forest. However, it was possible that he was already located on the edge of the forest, and there were too many gatherers coming and going. After walking, he didn't see a single herb. Well, that's not right either. He actually saw half of it. It was just a step slow and couldn't be rescued. Speaking of which, are there still sika deer in this forest? Qingyu looked back at the forest, as if he could vaguely see the smoky brown deer adorned with plum blossom patterns from the shade. Young and light in stature. Looking back, the other person seemed to be not afraid of strangers at all. He bounced up and down to him, tilted his head and glanced at him with his big black eyes. Then, in front of him, he took the medicinal plant that was only a few feet away from his feet and put it in his mouth. Chewing, swallowing, and even belching in frustration. Then he gazed again and leaned in front of Qingyu to sniff twice. In the end, he seemed to realize that the upright creature in front of him was not interesting. He wagged his furry short tail and turned around to leave. I feel more like a silly roe deer than a spotted deer. He has a charming and silly demeanor. Qingyu smiled and let go of this matter. He didn't think much about it anymore. It was quite rare to have a close encounter with a silly sika deer, and it was always a pleasant experience. As for that herb, just eat it, what else can he do? I am fortunate to have gained it, but I have lost it. He feels that his mood has indeed improved recently, and he hasn't read Taoist books in vain. Go down the mountain. Yunhe Temple, front yard. Bringing in a chair, Qingyu sat straddled on it, his clothes loose and flaccid, without any trace of the upright appearance of his family's children. He was completely indifferent and only focused on the basin in front of him. Mushrooms are soaked inside and being selectively washed. After cleaning, place them aside. Once finished, start the stove and cook a pot of fragrant soup. Of course, the name Bai Xian is actually limited by the conditions in hand, so it is impossible to create Bai Wei. Apart from other things, the only meat flavor in Taoist temples is the half-fan dried chicken hanging in the kitchen. As for pig bones, lamb waste, deer antler, and miscellaneous tonics, he does not have any. But in Chen Yu's view, the focus of Bai Xian Tang is not on these messy things, but on the word fresh. So what he is going to do today is to pair mushrooms with the big white roots, orchid fruits, and vegetables in the vegetable garden, and make a bowl of delicious soup that makes people drool. You can distrust his martial arts, but you cannot distrust his culinary skills. At least Chen Yu is quite confident himself. By the wall, the bamboo rod was leaning against the shade. It would take some time for the spotted bamboo to make the fishing rod. At first, he planned to cut it down and make it casually, but he thought it would be better to spend some time making a good one since it would be empty during this period. Not to mention high-quality products, at least they must be able to withstand production. So we had to do it in the shade, and then we had to go through steps such as baking and shaping. We carefully recalled our experience of making fishing rods in our next life. At that time, it was our grandfather who operated the knife, and he only ran back and forth to get his hands on it, like a monkey child, unable to hold on. This time, I plan to follow suit and personally get started. However, in this way, the time for wild fishing will be pushed back again. 5 days of drying and 2 days of baking and shaping. That means there are 8 days left when it comes to coating. With his hands constantly on, Chen Yu estimated in his heart that in 8 days, there would still be some time before Pingyu, so it's not impossible to go to Shentan to try his luck. Pingyu is very important before and after. The previous weeding and trenching were all prepared for this. If fishing conflicts with this period, he will undoubtedly choose to give up and focus on cultivating his half-acre mountain field. After all, it is related to one's own food supply for the next 6 months. It may also rain during this period, but it will definitely not be very heavy. At most, the land will be as wet as yesterday. Cannot immerse into the soil layer when it rains, there is a difference. The rain is strong and the wind is strong, and it is uncertain whether there will be mountains and rivers. Thinking about it, Chen Yu emptied his hand and looked down. It turned out that all the mushrooms in the basin had been cleaned, and they were lying neatly in the wooden barrel, eagerly waiting to be cooked. We still have to wait. I got up and went to the backyard, arrived at the edge of the vegetable garden, reached out and pulled out 2 large white roots. The tuber was snow-white, with 3 or 5 whiskers growing at the bottom, resembling a white radish, but not in the shape of a cone with a thick top and a thin bottom, but in the shape of water droplets with a thin top and a thick bottom. At the foot of the mountain, it is also called the Baijian or Baibangzi. Not only does it clear heat and relieve heat, but stewing soup is also a masterpiece. Then, he walked cautiously to a corner of the garden, stepping on the soil dragon and digging under the cover of clusters of green leaves. He quickly stopped his movements and withdrew a handful of red fruits that was not much larger than his thumb in his palm. The specific reason for the name of orchid fruit is unknown. Anyway, it is sour, sweet, and delicious, so it was given a nickname by Chen Yu. Little tomato. In my past life, there was also a type of small tomato, but its flavor was not as good as before. In contrast to the small size, the juice of the orchid fruit was very thick, and the flesh was thin. Taking a bite of it felt like eating a soup bun. Then he pinched the green vegetable leaves and picked off the last small piece of jade insect clothing. Chen Yu returned to the courtyard with his arms full. After a thorough cleaning, the construction will officially begin. Bake. The flames rose, and the bottom of the pot gradually became scorching hot. I don't ask for anything, I don't love anything, end of this chapter. Chapter 8. Fresh. Please comment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Fresh. Please comment. Cooking emphasizes a perfect combination of color, aroma, and flavor, but the seasonings are not complete. Chen Yu, who only has simple soy sauce, vinegar, and coarse salt, can only make slight choices. Fortunately, the final product sold well, and with his control over the temperature, he still made a decent dish. At the end of the day, he scooped a spoonful and tasted it, his eyes showing satisfaction. There was nothing to say, and his goal was basically achieved. The yellow mushrooms are soft and elastic, the chicken and fur are fresh and sweet, and there are also large and fluffy, soft marbles. Biting on the mushroom umbrella, one can only feel the soup overflowing, and the lips and tongue cannot stop trembling. The fragrance pounced on the wings of the nose, like a seductive little hand scratching the heart, making it itch and hard to resist, and making the mouth and teeth salivate. In the courtyard, the pots, bowls, ladles, and pots are arranged properly. Just as he was about to sit down, Chen Yu clapped his palm and almost forgot that there was another big shot in the audience. So he quickly got up and went to the main hall of worship, lighting incense and offering 2 pieces of green wax to the Taoist patriarch sitting at the top. According to the rules of this place, the time for worshipping the true ruler and Taoist ancestor is often set around noon on a day. There is a legend about Gain that at this time, yang energy was at its peak in the world, and the incense and vegetarian offerings offered by disciples were more easily noticed by these masters. It's just that Yunhe temple is dilapidated, and coupled with Chen's lack of expertise in this area, he thinks all day long about farming and serving dishes on the board. Therefore, in previous years, the daily incense without any obstacles became even more frustrating in his hands. I forget everything every 3 to 5 times, and it's hard to remember why I'm so busy burning too, which can be said to be perfunctory. Fortunately, he was not bound by these complicated formalities, and he believed that the etiquette during the offering was quite thoughtful, so he should not have offended these Taoist ancestors. After all, the world is so big, it's not like we just stare at the Yunhe temple family every day. Furthermore, the humanitarian ancestor himself did not say anything. Inside the hall, when the smoke was rising and it was confirmed that the elderly Taoist could also eat hot food, Chen Yu, who had neatly dressed and changed into a Taoist robe, returned and walked out. He casually grabbed a simple cloth robe and covered it on his upper body to prevent soup from dripping on his robe for a while. There are naturally more than one Taoist robe in the temple, but this set depicts clouds, moons, flowers, and birds. There is also a tall white crane riding in the mist and wind on the back, wrapped around the waist and abdomen, which is the identity symbol of the predecessor as the temple master. Of course, the main reason is that the material of this robe is good, the style fits well and is eye-catching, and it is comfortable to wear. Therefore, he usually doesn't wear it much to avoid getting stains casually. In my memory, the former master, the old abbot who was passed down to him, had his Taoist robe made of potholes, which was not aesthetically pleasing. I guess it's because I don't cherish my youthful vigor. Taking back his scattered thoughts, Chen Yu sat at the stone table, picked up bamboo chopsticks in his hand, and stuffed a piece of tender and smooth shiitake mushroom into his mouth. It's really not bad. He didn't think much anymore, just kept burying himself in the work. Although not as unappealing as swallowing raw and forcefully, the long-lost freshness still made him rare to let go of his stomach. Not only did he fill the 5 organs temple with all the steamed rice in the pot, but in the end, he directly picked up the pottery bowl and gulped down a bowl of beef. Fresh. Hiccup. After patting her belly and finishing the dishes on the table, Chen Yu cleaned and sorted out her plans at the back. The mountain is leisurely, and apart from some miscellaneous matters, there is not much that requires effort to deal with. However, one can be idle, but not lazy. Laziness leads to panic and delusions. Pingyu hasn't arrived yet, and the fishing rod will be dry in the shade for several days. He needs to find something to fill this gap. How about? Give it another try. Feeling bored and helpless, Chen Yu thought of the spiritual machine produced in the Sea of Consciousness, combined with the recent red earthworm. He had already experimented 5 times, but unfortunately all failed. For the first time, with caution in mind, I chose a weed in a corner of the yard. Then the grass grew wildly, thick and long, climbing from 2 inches to 6 feet in just half an hour. And then he died. Suddenly, when he realized it, there was only a withered and yellow wreckage left on the ground. Later, it was collected by Qianyu and now it is still stored in the pocket of the miscellaneous room to eat ashes. The following times were also similar, although the objects were not exactly the same, the results were particularly consistent. All died in battle. Big white roots with long roots, fist-sized orchid fruits, beans with thick skin that cannot be split with a knife, all of them quickly lost their vitality after undergoing drastic changes, dying too quickly and abruptly. Qianyu didn't give up, but turned around and threw the spiritual machine onto the animal, giving rise to the Earthworm King with a broken middle path. Can't live animals do it? With doubts in his mind, he tried the stone again, but there was no response when the stone touched the spirit machine. The released spirit cannot be retrieved, so we can only watch the other party silently dissipate. Returning to the present moment, Qianyu was about to temporarily shelve his experiment on the spirit machine, not only because it required a lot of mental energy to impact each time, like digging mountains and stones, which required a lot of effort to pick out such a small grain. At the same time, the number of spiritual machines is already limited. The ocean of consciousness is boundless and endless, but the only area that can truly capture light points and solidify them into spiritual machines is the very edge. From his first accidental entry into the ocean of consciousness, to today, the accumulated spiritual machines confined by that corner have only been in their early 20s for several months. On average, 1 pill per 3 days. But this time Qianyu has a new idea. However, before starting a new round of experiments, some preparations need to be made. Backyard, abandoned medicine garden. Qianyu was waving a hoe and dividing the entire medicinal field in half. It was said to be a field, but in reality, it was only 2 zhang square, not even half of the vegetable garden. Moreover, it has been abandoned for a long time, and the entire land is covered with various weeds, thriving and flourishing. Previously, his energy was mainly focused on the mountain fields and vegetable gardens related to food rations, and he did not pay too much attention to this abandoned medicinal field that had been abandoned for at least 7 or 8 years. However, this time it's just right. After taking care of this place, not only does it look clean, but it's also possible to plant some herbs in the future. Just like when Yunhe Temple was first built. It is said that at that time, the second-generation ancestors deliberately dug a century-old medicinal plant from the deep mountains to transplant, but unfortunately it was not successful. To this day, things have long changed. Like most of the current powers, Yunhe Temple also started with martial arts and established itself in turbulent times. Later on, he switched careers and became a Taoist. The first 2 generations of ancestors were both outstanding people who had made a name for themselves in the martial arts world. However, when it came to the 3rd generation, which was the master of the old master of the temple, they were still young and inexperienced, with a surplus of achievements and a lack of progress. As for the reign of the old abbot, it was even worse day by day in the western mountains at dusk, and later on, he suffered from human disasters. A group of highly respected descendants were all slaughtered and their bones were nowhere to be found. So he fell into a slump and had no strength to turn the tide. In Qianyu's eyes, Taoist temples like Yunhe Temple, which are not so much about seeking mysteries, are more like gang sects in previous martial arts novels. The two have a commonality, which is that they rely solely on a few experts to support the field, and the cultivation below the middle level depends entirely on luck. Lucky enough to produce a second-rate and first-class character, the sect will continue for another 10 or 8 years, but unlucky enough to lose its pillar. From peak to decline, it feels like a snowball rolling rapidly, going from peak to decline. As for the powerful forces like Xingyang Temple, which have undergone dynasties and have been passed down for hundreds of years without extinction, they are even rarer. Today, I tried to make a bowl of fresh soup as I wanted. As a result, don't ask, asking is you, _, end of this chapter. Chapter 9. Medicine Field, 4 comments. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Medicine Field, 4 comments. It has been proven that weeding is Qin Yu's second best job. His first skill is naturally cooking. Fishing ranks third. After 2 minutes of work, the originally chaotic medicinal field was cleaned up, and even the compacted soil layer was lightly turned over. The loose and soft soil was spread flat on the ground, some turning yellow, and it seemed that the fertility was not very strong. He gestured left and right, measuring the distance under his feet, using a hoe to pull out 2 shallow ditches, dividing the already small medicinal field into 3. After thinking for a moment, Qin Yu walked to the smallest area, squatted down, and lightly touched the ground with his palm. Deep in his consciousness, the waves were surging, and he, who had already experienced it several times, skillfully drove the waves transformed from spiritual power to continuously pound against the invisible web. The silver-white spiritual machine of Xiaoshan was firmly embedded, but still one was cut off under his persistent attack. Qin Yu inserted his finger into the soil. Try to combine the spiritual machine with the soil. As expected, the soil injected with the spirit machine did not undergo any changes, neither thickening out of thin air nor becoming black and fertile. There was no disappointment, he just stared and sensed the spiritual changes in the soil. For a long time, that light began to dissipate, transforming into countless scattered and slightly invisible dots of light, like fireworks blooming in the soil layer. At this moment, Qin Yu finally waited for the change he wanted. The surprise in my eyes became increasingly intense. As the spiritual machine shattered, another scene that he had never seen before appeared in his sight. The silver-white light particles turn into countless parts, sticking to each grain of soil. Rotting leaves, dead branches, stones, and everything beneath the soil layer are enveloped. The collapse continues, while the light particles become smaller and smaller, the breadth of adhesion is greatly spreading. From one point to another, after wrapping a target, it will continue to radiate in all directions. In the end, when the spiritual machine had become almost imperceptible to Qin Yu, everything froze. A network constructed by countless silver nodes appeared before his eyes, covering the soil layer. Surprisingly, it can really dilute. Qin Yu tried to dig through the soil with his hands again and found that once the soil was lifted off the ground, the diluted spiritual machine inside would dissipate within half an hour. Completely scattered into the air, no longer noticeable. After thinking for a moment, he stood up and went to the nearby vegetable garden to pull out 2 white sticks. After thinking for a moment, he pulled on the jade insect clothes. Gently insert into the medicine field. Only a portion was placed. The rest were planted in the soil that had not been integrated into the spirit machine. When transplanting, the plants were kept at a certain distance to prevent excessive growth and compression. Comparing the two may yield some benefits. Then he leaned against the wall and waited quietly. Surprisingly, after a full 3/4 of an hour, the plant this time remained in its original state without any changes. Especially those few plants on the soil with a spiritual mechanism, they are completely different from those who would twitch and grow wildly at the first touch. It seems that there won't be any results for a while. It remains to be seen whether the diluted spirit machine can still have enough impact on the target receptor as he imagined. Qin Yu no longer waited empty, but returned to the observation center and began his routine lunch break. Today I am reading Guanyin Luan. 5 Elements book. The content of this Taoist scripture is complex and simple, which is very suitable for a fake Taoist like him who is half a bucket of water. Time passed by, and in the blink of an eye, it was around 3 p.m. when we arrived at Xinshe. I don't know how those earthworms are doing either. With curiosity, he took off the bamboo tube that had been hanging on the pillar. Since he decided to make a good fishing rod, these earthworms obtained from weeding and digging channels have been stuck in the tube for a long time, except for the ventilation hole. Twisting open the lid, I saw that the soil inside was delicate and obviously often disturbed by drilling, and upon closer inspection, it seemed to be slightly darker than the color 2 days ago. Sure enough, earthworms can fertilize the soil. The thought slipped by, and Qingtai thought about putting these earthworms in the medicine garden first. Forget it, even if you put it in the vegetable garden, there is still a magic machine in the medicine field. These guys may come up with something if they go down and point it out. If they wake up and find themselves surrounded by a group of worm kings, I shudder at the thought of that scene. Speaking of the earthworm king, he shifted his gaze to another bamboo tube next to him. After opening it, the other person's straight body remained stiff and without any signs of decay. Do spiritual machines still have a preservative effect? This relationship is good. He thought recklessly and turned his attention back to his eyes. I originally planned to use this dead earthworm king to fish and try to see if there were dragons hidden beneath the deep pools in the mountains and valleys, as legend has it. However, the fishing rod did not land and I don't know how long it will last. I had to find a way to deal with it first, so as not to drag out another earthworm zombie. By the way, are the earthworms that inject spiritual machines still earthworms? Can you really fish? Fish won't dislike it, will they? Perhaps it was spring fatigue and summer fatigue. As the willow trees on the mountain path began to sprout, Qingtai felt that his mind was increasingly fond of daydreaming. My thoughts are like willow catkins, I can't say when they will float to the sky, and I can't even collect them. Finally, Qingtai took the bamboo tube and flipped it upside down in the garden, gently patting the bottom twice. Doodle doodle. The soil flew down, and the worms wrapped inside fell one by one, with some curls forming clumps and rolling on the ground. It is evident that these earthworms are much thinner than when they were caught. Chen is skilled in cooking and farming, but he is still a pure newcomer in breeding. The kind where the door doesn't even enter. I took a hoe and dug the soil, covering the scattered earthworms on the ground to prevent these little ones from escaping from the tiger's mouth and dying from the scorching sun. After dealing with this, he suddenly remembered that he seemed to have missed something. Although he didn't put any live animals into the medicine field, there were probably still a large number of small insects in the soil. Fortunately, the spirit machine does not have a danger setting that attracts other creatures, so it shouldn't be a problem to leave it overnight. I hope to wake up tomorrow without being surrounded by a group of insects with big fists. The fact proves that reality is always ordinary. The next day, not only were there no insects, but most of the plants transplanted in the medicine field also died. It is estimated that Qingtai's craftsmanship is too poor, causing some serious damage to the roots. As the night passed, half of it immediately withered, and some of the leaves in the remaining half turned yellow. As for those few jade insect clothes, none of them survived. He focused on observing the innermost corner of the medicine field, where a spirit machine was dropped. At the same time, most of the plants planted on it were also killed in battle, leaving only a big white stick struggling to support it, and he didn't know when it would die. Crouching down to concentrate and perceive, he could still vaguely feel the fluctuations of the spiritual machine in the soil layer, thanks to his extraordinary spiritual power and natural compatibility with the spiritual machine. The net I saw yesterday was no longer in shape, in tattered condition. After a whole night, the spirit machine that entered the soil evaporated for the most part. The only surviving big white root remains unchanged in size and color. Did you fail again? Not really. The fragmented network of spiritual machines is indeed about to completely collapse, but what can be clearly seen through those layers of land is that one node after another is constantly converging towards a certain point. It's the big white stick in a difficult situation, the spiritual machine condensed in the center of the rhizome, forming a cloud-like mist, seeming to be brewing something amidst the turmoil. Qingtai tried his best to see clearly, but in the next moment, the ocean in his consciousness seemed to be moved, and his gaze suddenly crossed the leaves and stems, penetrating them. He saw it. That is a milky white breath. On that day, Qingtai finally remembered his partition. Practicing martial arts. Practice your butt. Exciting face. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Preparation, 4 comments. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Chapter 10 Preparation, 4 comments. What is this? The sea of consciousness gradually subsided, and all the vision in front of him was receded. Chen Yu, who was squatting in place, blinked, somewhat confused about the situation. A ball of gas. Can the Bai Bang now produce oxygen? But the milky white one should not be oxygen, and his lack of chemical knowledge made him unable to understand what he had seen before. In a daze, he felt as if he had grown something extraordinary. Trying to use his spirit to pull, but the fluctuations in his mind just now seemed to be just a coincidence. Without the help of the sea of consciousness, Chen Yu could only stare for a moment. Helplessly, even if I wanted to break open the roots and see what was going on inside, I couldn't bear to destroy the remaining fruit. He got up and circled around the big white stick in front of him several times, but there was nothing he could do and he had to give up temporarily. Let's keep it for now and see what happens next. Since it is a vegetable, there will be a day when it matures. As for whether the unique white root under his feet will bloom or bear fruit when it matures, Chen Yu is also unknown. But by then, there should always be some changes. How many more seeds do you want to plant? Looking at 2 other areas left in the medicine field, his thoughts couldn't help but surge out. However, after some consideration, he restrained his curiosity and decided to observe for another 2 days. 1 is enough. If you plant too many and then use a spiritual machine to catalyze it, you can tie him up and become a sperm on the spot. That's enough. Planting in other places is not very reassuring, and the spiritual machine in my head has been used a bit frequently these days, with a visible decrease in quantity. Therefore, he planned to take a look first. If the Bai Zhen had no other abnormalities and was healthy and growing well, he might have really found some correct way to use the spiritual machine. It feels very compatible with farming inexplicably. Chen Yu sighed a bit, having been exploring this golden finger for quite some time. But it wasn't until today that I barely found a way out. In fact, a long time ago, when he first pried down a spirit machine and sent the opponent into the wild grass, and witnessed what could be considered a strange scene, he had some vague speculations about this magical light particle. In the following experiments, although the results were not satisfactory, there were still some new discoveries. As mentioned before, when targeting red earthworms, the strong external visual enhancement is actually just a superficial manifestation of the effect of a spiritual machine. If he guesses correctly, the essence of its effectiveness is more like a stimulus aimed at the source of the object. When the stimulus reaches a certain level, it can even cause evolutionary performance. The reason why it is called evolution rather than mutation is because according to Chen Yu's observation, this stimulus is generally benign. Whether it's the thickened cortex of the beans, the enlarged orchid fruit, or the dead bright red earthworm. One didn't have 2 extra eyes, and the other didn't have a face, completely different from what was imagined. At first glance, one would feel a bit surprised. How could the fruit of Lan Tingua grow so big? Thinking of this, Chen Yu couldn't help but feel a bit regretful, not being able to taste the taste of that fist-sized orchid fruit. In his view, the spirit machine itself has no good or bad qualities, but the process is too urgent, and for the previous experiment, the amount of a spirit machine is too strong to digest. If we can grasp this benign stimulus, perhaps some interesting things will happen. Chen Yu now wants to know that even small orchid fruits can grow like this. What about spring millet? 1,000 caddies fall from a half-acre square field. If that were the case, he would probably laugh out loud in his dreams. So, as the days passed, Chen Yu would occasionally wait in the medicine field, squatting on the ground, gazing at the big white stick. As time goes by, one can clearly feel that the other person's state is warming up, and the leaves are spreading and becoming increasingly green. Without the previous lethargy. At that time, all the vegetables that were also transplanted and planted were buried in lus, and under the catalysis of spiritual machines, they were transformed into the most primitive nutrients to nourish the growth of big white roots. Except for the first time, he was unable to penetrate the surface of the rhizome, but Yu was very clear that what he saw at that time was not an illusion. This plant, which doesn't seem to have much change in appearance, definitely contains something inside. This is not an empty speculation, because every time he approaches, faint palpitations come from deep within his consciousness. But it was not as strong as the first time, unable to stir up storms in the turbulent ocean of consciousness every day. In the blink of an eye, it was mid-March. Zkaka halfway tilting the rice jar, Yu bent down and reached into it, his head facing outwards. He vigorously scooped the last bit of rice into the bowl and took it out. Staring at the remaining small bowl of food, he seemed to have foreseen the hunger in the afternoon. Not enough at all. At least he is also a half-practitioner of martial arts, and having enough to eat and drink is the minimum requirement. He doesn't have the qualifications to eat meat in large gulps, and he doesn't have the capacity to drink in a big bowl. But he can't practice martial arts on an empty stomach, even if his body can tolerate it, his stomach can't. We need to go down the mountain. I thought I could hold on until after sowing before going down the mountain, but the current situation clearly cannot tolerate any further delay. Why did you see the bottom in the blink of an eye, even though there were still quite a few left before? Rice jar. What do you think? With a sigh, Yu hastily cooked rice from the pot and pinched a few pieces of the jade insect clothes that had just sprouted in the garden, making do with filling her stomach. Coincidentally, I picked orange and silver fruits a few days ago. While going down the mountain to buy grain, I'll also grab some of the Bai Yun San's medicine along the way. After he picked the orange and silver fruits, they were placed on the bamboo fence to dry. The fruits and grass roots were separated and tightly sealed. In my memory, both of these can be used as medicine. The former can be combined with Bai Yun powder, which can activate meridians, nourish qi and blood. The latter can also nourish blood, but with different parts, it can only nourish certain aspects. Commonly known as aphrodisiac. On his way down the mountain this time, Yu planned to bring the dried orange and silver grass roots to the pharmacy to exchange for some silver to support his family. This orange-silver grass is not very old, but its age is only one of the ways to distinguish the effectiveness of the herb. It can't be said whether it's spreading rumors or having ulterior motives, but in the eyes of the old Taoist who often goes to the mountains to collect herbs, the older the person, the more effective it is. This statement is deceiving ordinary people. If you really want to believe it, just wait and suffer a big loss. I didn't learn much else, but my predecessor who learned 2 skills in this area naturally left some foundation. As far as Yu knows, when collecting medicine at the Mountain Medicine Workshop, the first thing to look at is the herb picker, and then it's the herb's quality. The reason, of course, is to first see if the one who comes will be a lucky scapegoat. At the end of the day, this is not a fantasy world of immortals and heroes, and there is no setting where the longer the year, the stronger the medicinal power. The vast majority of herbs are like this. Of course, there are also exceptions. But those are too few to be taken as a norm. However, people are always curious, and anything that can break through existing common sense will often attract great attention. Not to mention ginseng that has grown for 100 years, even if the big white roots behind the yard grow for 10 years, they can be chased and said to be the elixir of becoming essence. Take 1 bite to strengthen blood and 2 bites to fly up in place. Don't mention it, there really seems to be a big white root that's about to turn into sperm behind the yard now. Yu shook his head and chuckled lightly. The big white stick had become more and more peculiar in recent days. It wasn't like it was shining all over and surrounded by a fragrant fragrance, but rather began to grow in the opposite direction. On the day when the spiritual network in the soil was completely absorbed, the entire torso shrank a bit. It has been about 5 or 6 days since then. Looking back this morning, most of the white rhizomes that were originally exposed outside the surface have shrunk underground. Only 2 palm-sized leaves swayed outside. By now, he could no longer control what exactly this thing would look like. So, in order to prevent it from being too much, no more clever tricks were added. I just hoped to not grow legs in the end and run away overnight like in the story. After taking care of it for a while, Qingyu withdrew his thoughts and took his waste bag, which was then filled with orange and silver grass. In fact, he hasn't been idle every day these days. I went up the mountain twice in the middle, picked some wild vegetables and mixed them in a corner of the garden, preparing to enrich the menu of the Taoist temple. One of them was lucky. After wandering around in the mountains and forests, he was about to return and found a long-eared white velvet plant by the edge of a haystack. It looks like deer antler, snow-white and clean. Confirmed the memory, it is also an aphrodisiac that Qin cannot use. I plan to go down the mountain together with orange-silver grass this time. Unfortunately, I didn't run into that silly deer, otherwise I would want to try what it feels like to roll up a sick deer. On the other hand, after several days, the bamboo poles have also been dried in the shade, and after baking the bamboo joints, they are now hanging upside down on the beam with a piece of pebbles tied. I guess you can try it out when you come back from the mountain. Speaking of which, did I forget something? After tidying up and preparing to depart, Qingyu looked back at the Taoist temple hidden in the green shade behind him. A handsome face was tilted up in the sunlight, with long hair tucked behind her head, and she casually inserted a bamboo hairpin to secure it. Well, forget it, maybe it's something that doesn't matter. Turning back and stepping into the mountain path, the young Taoist's back slowly disappeared. For a long time, in the temple, on the pillars, the bamboo tube trembled slightly. It seems, maybe. Is it time to sign the contract? Is the station short asterisk can I? Do I deserve it? End of this chapter.